Can you try and face forward? And then the next time I was sort of staring right into the camera lens, you know, what's that? So I think, you know, they wouldn't be hiring me again.
He was a lot of fun, but most of the time he was pretty normal. The minus side, we didn't see a lot of him.
A life on the road also put great strain on Norman's marriage. In 1969, he was busy forging a successful career in the United States.
He did films in America. He did Androcles and the Lion for Noel Coward. He also did Walking Happy on Broadway. And it was on Broadway, whilst he was working there, that he heard that his wife had gone off with another fella.
My wife at home had found somebody tall and good-looking.
I think if Norman had stayed in America, he would have been a big international star in the States as well. But I think Peter Sellers eventually got that slot as the English funny man, and the rest is history.
We had normal family problems, and I had to come back from America to look after my two lovely children, and I'm glad I did, and that's the end of that.
The man who'd been abandoned as a child was granted custody of his own children. Their mother remarried, keeping in contact. Norman never married again.
My mother left home and I was absolutely devastated. And but he found a wonderful lady called Madge, and we used to call her Magic because that's exactly what she was. And Dad made sure that because he obviously was still away, you know, working hard, that Madge was there to look after us, and she really was a very, very special lady.
He was a loving father at that time, but I think probably I should have seen a little bit more of my mother. You know, she was a good woman, and you know, it was an acrimonious split.
The BBC presents The Norman Wisdom Show.
By the 1970s, Norman was a screen and stage star. But the pressure was now on to make it in television.
He did some good shows in the 70s, just called Norman, Nobody is Norman Wisdom, those sort of things, a little bit of wisdom for ATV. And they were successful, but they weren't sort of legendarily successful, so they're not repeated now, for example. You don't see them on TV.
I made sure that he was on every radio show we could get him on, or television appearances. He didn't want to do them because he was Norman Wisdom, and he felt, you know, do I need to do this? But I think with the public, you have to keep that profile high.
Norman toured worldwide, and from the 1980s onward, he featured in cameo roles in some of our best-loved series, such as Bergerac.
I'll see if we can pick him out, all right? We'll send a car around for you.
Well, yeah, all right.
Nothing wrong, is there?
No, it's just that, you know, I haven't done anything like that before, that's all. Oh, this is one off, this is.
And Last of the Summer Wine.
I'm an honest man, has to be admitted. She needs a touch of work.
Unfortunately, the one big TV role he was offered, Frank Spencer, in Some Others Do Have 'Em, he had to turn down because of other commitments.
Well, Some Others Do Have 'Em was actually written for Norman, but there were scenes in it where they wanted him to put his foot down the toilet and do things like that, involved with what he thought was lavatorial humour.
I'm Mr. Spencer. The wife's a bit tired, so I thought I'd try you.
And consequently, he thought, well, this isn't for me, because he was squeaky clean at the time, and so consequently pulled out of it, and Michael Crawford got it.
That could have been the big sort of TV break, and off the back of the films from the 60s into the 70s and early 80s, he could have been doing this sort of comedy again for television generations, and he regretted that for the rest of his life.
Don't cry, honey, don't cry.
Get off!
But there were no regrets attached to Norman's role in a television play released in 1981. It cast Norman in a whole new light, receiving critical and audience acclaim. The BBC playhouse Going Gently, directed by Stephen Frears, featured Norman and Fulton Mackay as terminal cancer patients.
Do you drink?
Doctor's orders.
And what do the Wizards of the Knife have in store for you?
They're going to give me an exploratory operation.
Fun.
How do you know?
Tomorrow they're going to make it a triumvirate.
Jeez.
We talked to a lot of people about being in it. And then his name was on a list, and I said, oh, that's a rather interesting idea. I think this is a rather wicked thought. I thought that if you were dying and wanted a rather graceful death, you might well wake up and find that Norman was in the bed next to you. He was so disruptive and anarchic that any thoughts of a quiet, dignified, heroic death would immediately be destroyed.
What's the matter with you? I can't understand you at all. He wasn't such a bad fella.
Do you need him?
Probably not. I just said he wasn't such a bad fella. You all right?
I had to get up my courage to cast him. And I suppose I'd assumed that he'd be very good, and he was very good. So, but I could see that I was using bits of him that people didn't normally ask for.
During lunch, Stephen Frears said, Norman, I want specifically for you to avoid doing any comedy. And I said, well, you know, it's a straight play. He said, yes, I know, but I want you to avoid doing any comedy within a straight. I could see what he was getting. I couldn't help saying, I couldn't help pulling his leg a bit. I said, well, look, no, if I'm in a nightshirt, he said, you will be. I said, well, there's, for instance, certain comedy within the bounds of the play. If as I walk away from the bed, having got out, and I catch my nightshirt on the spring of the bed, as I walk away, eventually it'll tighten up and pull me back like that, and I put my foot in the chamber pot underneath the bed, and he'd gone pale.
He would just send me up hopelessly.
I asked him.
And?
Not too good.
It never is.
What am I going to do?
Complain. Moan like the rest of us.
How long have you got?
They didn't say. But my guess is 6 weeks, maybe 7.
Give me 6. I've got to have longer. Got to have more.
He just was very, very powerful and potent and expressive. And that's always a pleasure.
Certainly I didn't realise before that you could strip away all the faces and the agility and all that and just leave that little man underneath.
He'd acquired a sort of wisdom by then. I imagine that life had been quite rough to him in the previous 10 or 15 years.
Going Gently won a BAFTA and established Norman as a serious actor. Even so, he continued to stay in comic character publicly, and his ability to cause chaos in interviews was by now legendary.
I normally...
It is difficult to know what he's going to do, especially if you don't know him, because he can do anything. He can wind people up. He's got a terrible sense of humour.
It's good to see you. Come sit down there. Norman, over there.
He could just cause chaos just by walking into the room. You could see people getting nervous and